Good morning, folks. Welcome to the Rangers Review morning briefing on Tuesday, I think it is, the 21st of June. We're in that period of summer where you forget what day it is. I'm delighted to be joined, not by Johnny McFarlane today, but by my friend, your friend, Stevie Clifford from Four Lads Had a Dream. Stevie, how's the summer? How are you getting on without the football?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, mate. I'm enjoying the break, like everybody else at the moment, just probably battling hay fever. Seems to be the big challenge of this summer. But yeah, I mean, enjoying the break, but also at the same time now looking forward to the players coming back and getting back into it.
Absolutely. Well, just a quick word for our sponsors before we get into today's show. One Football, which you can download for free in the description. It supports us and allows us to bring you videos like this every single day. As you know by now, and if you haven't downloaded it, why? Because we speak about it every day. You can get everything on there, all your transfer news. When the football comes back, you can get everything before the game, after the game. And if you want to follow a team down south as well, if you have a team in the Premier League or the Championship, you can go and do that. And remember as well, there's plenty of Rangers Review articles over on the site, One Football. So you can download that for free. Link at the very top of the description, the One Football app. Right. Only one place to start then, Stevie. Allan McGregor. This is not something that many people thought we would be discussing in late June, I think after the Scottish Cup final. So to track back, Allan McGregor replaces John McLaughlin for the final 2 minutes. Everyone thinks he's going to retire, but McGregor, speaking to Rangers TV after, says, look, I genuinely haven't thought about it. It's been game recovery. Obviously, the intensity of that period of time with the Europa League final is very true. Then we start to hear noises that McGregor might be staying. So as it stands, it's going to be the same goalkeeping contingent as last season. This is a difficult one, Stevie, isn't it? Because McGregor certainly, the reaction to him staying this season compared to last season isn't as warm, I would say. There's certainly a lot of scar tissue from some mistakes and lost points. McGregor has come back from setbacks before, and he has come back from periods of time where people think he can't do it again. But equally, age at some point will, have a decline that is irreversible. What was your reaction to the news? Where do you stand on it all? How do you think it's going to play out?
Well, it wasn't a surprise. It's been well documented that after obviously the cup final, like you mentioned, he was now giving it some thought. And then there's obviously been the rumours the last few weeks that he's been in discussions. It's been known that he was offered a 1-year deal. So him signing it yesterday isn't a surprise to me. Listen, Al McGregor is an outstanding athlete. That's one thing we have to remember. He's very dedicated. He's very, he's very professional in his job and what he do. He trains hard every single day, and he's a great role model in that dressing room. So that's all going to have an effect on whether or not we wanted to keep him. We obviously have wanted to keep him, and this is where we are. My own feelings on it, Joshua, you know that I've been very vocal in thinking that John McLaughlin deserves a run as Rangers number one. That was backed up, in my opinion, by Scottish Cup semi-final and final performances where he looked really assured. However, it wasn't only 18 months ago where we were discussing Allan McGregor as being our player of the year. So in terms of, I know that he's older in terms of that, but Allan McGregor is more than capable of getting back to that form in terms of his own performances, because it was only a couple of months ago where he was outstanding home and away to the likes of Red Star and playing a big part in our European run. So he has had mistakes, but also defensively, when we think about Allan McGregor's mistakes and worrying about crosses in that situation, the things that became big problems last year, Joshua, were not big problems when Rangers were going and winning league during 55. So defensively as well, we've got work to do to, become more solid in terms of making sure that these crosses aren't coming in and these things aren't happening. Because I don't remember having these big concerns about Allan McGregor during that season, and it's only one back. So it's twofold. We can be worried, and I think that's absolutely fair when we think about Allan's form domestically post New Year. There's been a lot of individual errors. There's been a lot of things where you look at and think, oh, you could have done better there. and that's not like him. So only he'll know. And if he's positive that he can get his form back, then I can see why they've renewed it. I would like it to be a situation where it wasn't set in stone that he's our number one.
Yeah.
That John McLaughlin could perhaps get a shot and get a run at it. However, there's two sides. This Rangers team really needs attacking threat in it, Joshua. Really needs it. The lack of goals last season was hugely evident, and it ended up costing us. If Rangers are prioritising that, and they feel that Allan McGregor for another season is better than going to spend 3-4 million on buying an equivalent, then I can see why they've went for that.
Yeah, and I guess as you say, Stevie, we don't know what role McGregor will fulfil, and that's not kind of been made public at the moment. You'd imagine, given the fact that, if you go back to the 55 season, it was John McLaughlin that started and kept his place for points. Last season, he was the cup keeper. So it'll be interesting to see what Van Bronckhorst kind of does with that. But it's a good point. The defence obviously was, going back to when Gerrard was there and Rangers conceded, was it 7 or 8 games in a row they conceded the first goal, I think culminating in the game against Ross County before Gerrard left. The season before that wasn't an issue. And if we're going to have a piece out on the website in the next couple of days about the numbers behind McGregor and kind of looking exactly at how, did he cost Rangers points? And last season, he wasn't in the red. He didn't have a negative return in terms of the goals he should have saved above average. But the season before, it was so high that, that's what he's compared off. But an interesting little parallel, Stevie, is the first season he came back, he was brilliant. The second season, 1920, it kind of dipped. You could see it rising again, I guess. But, as I say, age obviously is a factor at one point. The other question you've got to ask, and you said this about John McLaughlin, is McLaughlin signed a 2-year contract back in earlier this year. Now, you spoke to McLaughlin before, I think it was before the Europa League final.
Yep.
And he was speaking then about being the number one, but also, really retaining that respect for Allan McGregor. What did you take from that conversation and what his tone was like?
Well, his tone was very assertive. I felt that John gave us 3 or 4 minutes of his time, which doesn't maybe seem like a lot of time, but it's a lot of input. And what he said during that time was really quite prominent in terms of he was very assertive in that he was here to be number one. He wasn't signing on to be number 2 again, regardless of what was happening with Allan, etc. He was very, as you said, he was very respectful to that. Mm-hmm. However, he was adamant, very, very assured he's not signing on to be number 2, and he's pushing, and this is going to be his push now to be Rangers number 1. What I would like to say, though, Joshua, is that Allan McGregor is without doubt a legend in Rangers history. I think his legacy is assured. I think that everything he's done at the club is set in stone. Arguably, people will say that he's the best goalkeeper we've ever had, longevity, etc. There's an argument there. And I think given how good goalkeepers we've had, that's testament to how well he's done. Yeah. Some of the comments about him the last 24 hours have been maybe over the top, maybe reactionary to where we are in terms of a transfer window rather than the decision itself. If Rangers had been in a position where we'd got a couple more attacking players in, spent a wee bit of money, I think this wouldn't have been as big an issue as it might be at the moment in time. It's all about prioritising where we are. I'm just trying to be... Everybody knows where I stand in terms of goalkeeping wise, so it's not like I'm suddenly changing and saying that McGregor should continue as our number 1. I've been quite open in that. I think it's time that John McLaughlin got that position. I remain the same. The cup final, the semi-final, as I mentioned before, has maybe just reiterated that to me. I think we're calmer. I think we had a couple of crosses in the last couple of minutes in both of those games, Joshua, especially the semi-final, and he came out and dealt with them expertly well. And I think that for me is a big plus. I just don't want to be disrespectful and say to Allan McGregor that it's finished, that it's over, etc. I think that would be wrong. And if anybody can storm back, like you said, he's had dips before, then I think he can. We've got to be better defensively as well. We went from conceding 13 goals to conceding 13 goals, I think, by the end of October this season. So we need to be better. Hopefully, John Suter, etc., will help that. I'm not as disappointed in this renewal because it's had time to kind of resonate and we've thought over it. We just need to see if he starts off the season as number one and his form picks up, then great. But if he starts off and it's where we were last season, I think that's when people will ask questions of Giovanni Van Bronckhorst if he doesn't make the decision. And that's probably a bigger factor in where we're going to be. If he wants to give him a shot to try and reclaim that, then fine, okay, I get it, understand it. But if he can't and it's still happening and he doesn't then rectify it, I think that's when you'll see a bigger kind of reaction to where we are.
Do you think there's an argument to be had that, Van Bronckhorst is happy with the squad with a couple of additions, as you say, and I'm sure that's inevitable. But in general, in keeping Arfield, a player that obviously evidently liked at the start, and keeping Davies, a player that played more towards the end of the season, and now McGregor, given the fact that if you look at the old firms towards the end of the season, obviously the European run, some good signs in domestic competition. Do you think Van Bronckhorst is thinking, look, this squad can kind of start a new cycle with me, with a new style, and it's about adding quality in areas, as happened at the start of the 55 league season, where the plan wasn't ripped up, but there was just intelligent additions made in Roof and Hadji that made a big difference. What do you think about that?
I would have said to you, if you had asked me that question back in March and in the beginning of April, I would have said to you no, because he isn't using the squad. And I wrote a piece for the Rangers Review that said that Gio needed to look and expand beyond the kind of 16 he was looking at, which included the likes of Scott Wright, Stephen Davis. They were the two prominent ones that I mentioned. They then began to get bit parts and play a more prominent part in the running. I'm not for 1 second sitting here saying that Scott Wright or Stephen Davis should be starting every week. I think but they are strong enough to make a good influence from the squad, and I think that's where we are. I'd like to see starters brought in, 2 or 3. I also would like to see less. You're asking guys like, my issue with that statement is that you're asking guys like Joe Rebo, Glenn Kamara, James Tavernier, Connor Goldson to go back to the well again for you and play 60 games, which I think is difficult, especially on guys like Joe Rebo. We've seen his best form 6 weeks before Christmas. And then the amount of games in the African Nations Cup, etc., I think that took its toll. So I'm not for ripping it up, but the contractual thing is a huge bearing on it. My own personal feeling is that if they won't renew, then they have to go, and we should try and profit on them. I know we won't get sums that we maybe thought we might. I know that Sevilla are strongly linked with Alfredo Morelos. I know that it's not popular, and Alfredo is our talisman, etc. We can't afford for him to walk away next summer for nothing. So that's going to decide where we are in terms of a major revamp. If the guys were to stay and we to add 2 or 3 maximum fresh faces, and it has that same effect, then everybody would take that, and I think that's a fair comment. I think Gio's probably, instead of being stuck with a 16s, maybe moved to an 18, 19-man squad that he's quite comfortable with now. I think that's fair to say. I still think we need refreshments. I think it would be wrong to go with this squad again and ask them to do it all over again. Doesn't need ripped up. I think Europe's proved that. I would have told you back in February and March that I do think it does need ripped up, but maybe that has changed slightly in terms of Gio's thinking. Certainly has mine, but we do need additions, Joshua, especially numbers-wise, attacking-wise. I think that has to be evident. It has to be smart signings. We don't need quantity, we need quality.
So let's talk hypothetically then, Stevie. Hypothetically, if Aribo, Morelos and Kent were all to stay this window, and you presume maybe one player will go because of the player trading model, would you be happy if Rangers signed a right winger who's going to contribute with goals and a midfielder maybe in that position beside Aribo and Lundstrom? Do you think you need 2 kind of nailed on starters who are going to come in and be able to, like a Kent and a Aribo, that type of signing that's going to be able to really contribute week in, week out and provide a consistent output? Would that be enough for you? Do you still think there's more additions needed in terms of kind of beefing up the squad, maybe adding another third choice striker, which I think will be needed because Itten's gone?
Yeah, I would have said to you right there. I think defensively we're absolutely fine. There's huge options at centre half. In fact, I was counting yesterday when you look at the likes of Simpson, Hollander, these guys, they're now on the verge of being fifth, sixth choice. James Sands as well can cover in there. So that situation is completely covered and probably has to change, Joshua, in terms of numbers. We can't carry that many. I think defensively in midfield, when you look at Jack, Lundstrom, Kamara, Davis, we're sorted, and Sands can play there as well. So we're completely sorted defensively as well.
Mm-hmm.
When you move forward and you think about him playing a 3 and maybe changing slightly, if you look at the left-hand side, Sakala and Kent is pretty much sorted. I'd like to see a wee bit more rotation in there, possibly. I'm not a massive fan of Sakala's quality, but I'm a massive fan of the kind of anarchy that he brings in terms of he's so direct and he can score goals, he can get numbers. These guys are so valuable. On the right-hand side, it's only Scott Wright, in my opinion. Hadji and Aribo can play out there, but I think you're taking things away from them in terms of their quality centrally if they're out there. I'd like to see a goal-scoring right-sided player. Now, I know that's really difficult to find, but if you could add a guy that can get 7 to 10 goals, the difference would be incredible, not only to him, but to the rest of the team. Because all of a sudden, if you're putting 2 on Kane and you're putting 2 on Aribo or whatever, because there's nobody on the right-hand side, all of a sudden you can't do that because you've got to watch the guy on the right-hand side. We do need, it would be nice if we had something a wee bit different in the middle, but that player in the middle might be Yanis Hadji, Joe Aribo, Alex Lowry. So he might not feel like he needs that in there. We do definitely need firepower. We need somebody that is capable of hitting 20 goals in this league. We haven't had a 20-plus striker since Kenny Miller in 2011. Alfredo, roughly, not definitely, roughly in terms of numbers, has went 17, 11, 12 kind of number-wise, league-wise, because he's so good in Europe. It boasts it and it boosts it up, etc. And understand that, and that's not a criticism of Alfredo, but we need somebody that can push Alfredo, that can get numbers like Roof did in the title-winning season. Maybe didn't get last year as much because of availability, etc. Roof's a great player. Questions whether or not he can be fit the same way as Hollander, Suter, etc. We worry a wee bit about Roof. If I was to choose 2 right now, right winger's my number 1 priority. Another striker that's going to push. I don't even think the third choice is right, Joshua. I think if you can get somebody that's going to score goals, he'll push for starting, and he can easily get more out of Alfredo and push, not to be alongside him. I don't think Alfredo plays nice with a partner, but I think in terms of pushing Alfredo on, you don't need to then go to the well for Alfredo and say 90 minutes all the time. You can rotate him, and you'll probably get more out of him in terms of return than constantly asking him to play every week where we've been. So that would be my choices, and then I would go for a midfielder, something a bit different because of Aribo, Hadji, Lowry, then being there. So I wouldn't want to stifle them. If Hadji's going to be a central player up behind the striker, that would excite me. Now, I know he's not going to be ready for 2-3 months, but Lowry and Aribo could fill in and do that. So I think we might be okay there. It's attacking numbers I need to see.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And definitely if you look at last season compared to the season before, I think Hadji had 1 goal and assist compared to maybe 14 or 15 the season before. And Roof actually did have, I think he had 10 league goals by the end of the season. Or that could be wrong, but that's with a few penalties, and he had 14 non-penalty goals before. So he had 7 non-penalty goals, so kind of a half of his output, and that's the important goals. I mean, you look back to the 1-1 draw with Dundee United, and Roof didn't seem to be in favour at that point, but you look at the chances that were on that day. If you had someone who could put the ball in the back of the net, I'm sure that Rangers might have got something there. And it is just numbers that they need in and around the box. I don't think it's getting the ball from box to box. And it actually goes back to, interestingly, what Steven Gerrard used to say at the start of the season. He always spoke, Stevie, in press conferences about winning the boxes. And I think it was winning the boxes was his phrase. But he also spoke about the team being really good box to box in terms of creating chances. It was just that final bit that was lacking. So that's certainly, I think, where improvement needs to come in domestic competition. Just finally, Stevie, Michael Beale, the pleasure of speaking to him yesterday with a couple other journalists. Obviously, he's now at QPR. It was his unveiling yesterday. It was really nice to have a word with him, and he was very generous with his time. Just want to read out a few quotes, because there was some really interesting stuff in here, and I know all Rangers supporters will be really interested in hearing what Beale had to say, and you can go and watch the interview on this YouTube channel or read some more about it over on the website, where you can subscribe for free. But Beale says, after the huge experience that I had up in Scotland and coming to the Midlands to work with Aston Villa, I felt I was over-ready. I was overcooked a bit as an assistant. Now is the right time to start on my own. If I wasn't working with someone who had the stature of Steven Gerrard and enjoyed the relationship that I had with him, I'd have been a manager probably before coming to Rangers. I took the choice to work with Stephen, and while I was at Rangers, had 5 or 6 opportunities to move on. But I always rebuffed them because I was part of a project and a plan at Rangers. And he goes on finally, when asked about, could you one day return to Rangers, typically quite humble, as Michael Beale always comes across. He says, no one would turn down Glasgow Rangers. As it stands just now, I was a good assistant at Rangers. Where Rangers are now, they can secure any manager they want. I'm just a novice manager and I have to do well at QPR. Do I have a lot of friends at Rangers and am I friendly with the board? Yes, my links are strong. But when Gio eventually decides to move on, they will have a host of people after the job. The club has just played the Europa League final. I think they'll be looking at much bigger fish than Mick Beale. So obviously that's, very humble from Beale. Obviously, he does have to go and prove himself as a number one. What do you make of his quotes, Stevie? Because I had a real interest in just hearing a bit about Michael Beale, about his own coaching ambitions, because he made such an impression on everyone during his time in Scotland.
Yeah, listen, nothing but admiration for Mick Beale. A guy that I've got a lot of time for, a guy that's given me a lot of time as well. So wish him nothing but the best in terms of QPR. I think it's a really good job for him. I think that Mark Warburton done a good job with them in terms of sometimes at football clubs you can get guys that can only take you there, and then you need the guys that will take you on. And I hope that Mark Warburton's given Mick Beale a really good sounding and a really good platform that he can build on if he adds and tinkers 2 or 3. I think that there was points last season where Warburton had them round about 6th, learned about the playoff places. Then they dipped. I think they went maybe 10 games where they didn't win or they didn't get the right results. So that's going to be where Mick Beale needs to kind of add the experience. In terms of Mick Beale, in terms of Kevin Thompson, these are the guys that we should be looking at and keeping an eye on for 5-6 years down the line. Both are very young in terms of their managerial projects, in terms of where they are as a number one experience. But for me, these are the guys where we should be keeping a wee eye on future to be involved with the club. I'm not saying Rangers managers because you don't know where they're at or how they're going to be. But at this moment in time, they're the guys that, it's a bit like when you send younger guys out on loan as players and then bring them back. So we should certainly be keeping an eye on them in terms of their futures. And as for Mick Beale, very much like Kevin Thompson, when he gets back into it as well, you wish them all the best and hope that they can have really bright futures. And I'll certainly be looking at QPR and keeping an eye on them this season.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, Stevie, just before we go, if you want to remind people where they can find your work as well as your work on the Rangers Review.
Yeah, sure. You can find me 4 Lads of the Dream on Twitter and on social media. It's 4ladsofthedream.blog. If you type that into Google, it'll bring you up the actual blog website. Weekly kind of blog updates and things. Although at the moment, Joshua, as you know, things are quite quiet. So we don't write for the sake of writing. So there's not been much output. Rangers Review, you can find me every Friday with my column there. This week I'll be writing on Allan McGregor. So maybe be a kind of more longer piece on what we spoke about in terms of that and defensively and maybe a few numbers, Joshua, which I'll ask you for because you know that I can't find these things. So happy. If anyone wants to speak to me, that's where they can find me.
Perfect. Well, Stevie, thanks so much for your time. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Remember, you can subscribe for free over on the rangersreview.co.uk at the moment. Keep the notifications on for YouTube for when we go live and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. We'll be back tomorrow morning.